Welcome everyone, I am Stefano Grancini and this is Connected, the podcast of Nova Economics Club. So guys, today we are going to present the research projects of the guys that worked with the Health Knowledge Center of Nova SBE. Here with me there are Ruben and Francisco. Welcome guys.
Hello.
Hello.
And today we are going to see their project, we're going to analyze and to see which were the most important challenges. But guys, don't forget to check the project on our website. So, the first question I would like to ask you guys is why did you start to do this project? Which was your main motivation to develop this project?
Sure. So first, thank you for having us here. It all started with us wanting to study what was happening with the mortality figures in Portugal during the year of 2020, mainly for the pandemic months. So basically, we wanted to study the excess mortality in that period, and what excess mortality is the mortality that is attributable to a certain crisis and that is above and beyond deaths that would have occurred in normal conditions. So basically our goal was to do a forecast where we use things like a linear trend, seasonality, homologous deaths, temperature anomaly to quantify what would be happening in normal conditions were the pandemic not to occur. And then we compare that number of deaths to the actual number of recorded deaths during the pandemic. And if the actual number is higher than the estimation, we are likely to have excess mortality. And so basically our final goal was to analyze and explore these data to try to find trends and potential explanations for the values of excess mortality, try to explain how much of the excess mortality was explained by the COVID-19 deaths, and what could be explaining that, and what could be explaining the other deaths that were in excess but were not being caused by COVID-19 deaths itself. So basically getting the numbers and exploring them.
Thank you, it was very interesting. And now I would like to know which were the most challenging part in the development of your project.
Well, the first challenge that we faced was to choose which variables we would like to put in the model, because it happened that we tried to capture some effects on mortality, but then there was not data available to support them. For example, I can tell you that the excess mortality that we report in our paper can be slightly overstated. And the reason for this is that the pandemic caused some types of deaths to decrease. And these deaths are, for example, that's related to car accidents, that's related to other infectious diseases such as flu, that's at work. So this kind of deaths decrease due to the pandemic. And this decrease was mainly caused by the lockdown and the decrease in movement of people. And we tried to find some proxies of the movements of people, but the reality is that there's not really good proxies of that, and even the ones we found, we couldn't find data available to support them. So we had to let this effect aside. Another challenge I can tell you was to start to run the model, because for us was not easy to find, at least in the beginning, was not easy to find the most proper, most correct, most scientific ways to run the model. But at the end, I think we ended up with very good results. Our results were very similar to the one presented in the news and in another papers. So yeah, I guess we were able to overcome these challenges.
Thank you, Ruben, for your contribution. I can totally understand how many challenges you guys face during your project. It's totally normal. But now I would like to know more about your results and which are the main results that you guys would like to present today here with us?
Well, I guess this answer can be divided in two, because our analysis is not only at the national level, but also at the regional level. So I will let Francisco discuss the regional level, and I will first present the results for the country. So our main conclusion regarding the national results were that between March and December of last year, the excess mortality was around 11,700 deaths, which means that last year 12% of deaths in Portugal were caused by the pandemic. And not only this, but there was also, in 88% of the days, there was excess mortality, which means that the effects of COVID were not only seen and felt during the big waves that we all felt, but also during periods in which the pandemic was seen as controlled. However, this excess mortality did not evolve at a constant pace throughout the year, and we can identify clearly three big waves of excess mortality. The first was during the first lockdown, the second was during the months of July, in the summer, and the last one was during the months of November and December. And while the first and the last waves of excess mortality were kind of expected, because we were living in a period where both cases and deaths related to COVID were very high, the wave of excess mortality that we had in July was for us unexpected. And the main cause of this wave in excess mortality that we can say was that people refrained from going to the hospitals. I can tell you that during this period, Portugal was hit by a massive, by an aggressive heat wave, and the people in need to get medical care refrained from going to the hospitals with the fear to get contaminated. And to support this argument, we found out that during these months of July, August, the deaths at home rose at a level way above the historical average, which proves that indeed people refrain from going to the hospitals. And this relates to the last point I want to make from the national results, which is that the pandemic caused indirectly many deaths. In our paper, we found that 41% of excess mortality was not directly related to COVID-19, but rather the consequence of side effects. And these side effects can be, for example, the one I already mentioned about the fear of the population to get medical care, but also the decrease in both quantity and quality of the services provided by the National Health Service, because it was under great pressure, and also the deepening of mental health problems caused by the lockdown. And yes, these were the three main points I wanted to highlight about the national results.
Yeah, so maybe I can pick up and go to our main findings at the regional level. And yes, right, they were in line with what Ruben highlighted for what we saw at the national level, if not for more, just because the national is somehow the sum of the several regions. But when we look at the regions at an individual level, there is some heterogeneity in what we see in excess mortality, and this is mainly explained by region-specific characteristics. And basically what we saw was that North ended up being the region where we estimate an higher excess mortality, around 5,150 deaths. And most of it came from the beginning of the pandemic, or at least when compared to the other regions in the beginning of the pandemic, the first months, this was very relevant in North, and North was the first region to be strongly affected by the pandemic. And well, then what happens is what Ruben is also mentioned. we have people dying from COVID, and of course that will influence excess mortality, but at the same time having lots of COVID cases and deaths turns up and reflects into more social isolation, into more restrictions, into more pressure in the healthcare services, which turns into higher excess mortality. So then you have the excess mortality explained by COVID-19 deaths and the excess mortality explained by the other things related to the pandemic. There are a consequence of the pandemic. So in the beginning we saw this excess mortality more prevalent in North. During the summer months, Lisboa e Val do Tejo was the region most affected, mainly because the pandemic started increasing its pace there, and so we saw all these effects that we mentioned. And the other result that I would like to highlight here at the regional level is for Alentejo, because Alentejo, even though at an absolute level only had 840 deaths in our excess mortality estimate, when we size this by the population, this number is very, very high. And this happens mainly because around 27% of this excess mortality we detected in the month of July. So basically during the heat wave that Ruben mentioned, then the population of Alentejo is aged, mostly aged population, already with a large social isolation pre-pandemic. And so when you add all these things, that they are aged, that they were already isolated before the pandemic, and then with the pandemic they have to be more isolated, the elder have to break up with their normal routines that kept their mental and physical health, then there is like a perfect scenario for the excess mortality to ramp up, and actually we saw that in Alentejo, and so Alentejo was the most affected region in terms of when we weighted by population, and in the end our estimate is that 73% around something around that of the excess mortality in Alentejo is not explained by COVID-19 deaths. So it's explained by all the rest, all the other conditions that led to mortality to increase in this period. And I think that were our main regional differences.
Okay, thank you guys for having presented your result in such a clear, accurate and interesting way. I'm very proud of your work. And guys, it was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you, Francisco and Ruben.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you guys, thank you for having listened to this podcast, and see you guys to the next podcast. Stay connected.